After doing a lot of random facts videos, it happens pretty frequently where a fact I go over in that video is actually found in the in-game tips. Now this doesn't necessarily mean it's an oversight on my end, because more often than not, the fact is new information to a lot of people. What this means is that, reasonably, people don't take the time to read the in-game tips. But at some point I became kinda curious about how many more cool facts are in these tips. So for today's video I went over all 1500 plus fighter tips, and saved all the facts that I didn't know about beforehand. This isn't a completely comprehensive list of all neat facts found in the tips, but it should cover new content for the channel. So let's hop into it. But before we get into anything, I want to quickly talk about today's video sponsor, Opera GX. Opera GX is a free web browser alternative that truly fits all you gamers out there. It has a wide variety of features to enhance your experience. You can chat and browse simultaneously on social media channels like Twitter or Discord, integrated right into the sidebar. This feature allows you to keep all your social media at hand in your browser, and get notifications from all social media apps you use. You can also log into various music playing apps directly from the sidebar, including Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube Music. The player lets you keep your favorite streaming services in one place. And whenever you start streaming video or audio in your browser tabs, player automatically pauses, and then resumes once the tab is finished. On top of this, there's loads of customization options. The accents in Opera GX are inspired by neon lights and how they break the darkness of the night. You can customize the browser with particular themes, wallpapers, and colors. And you can stay up to date with free games whose active selection process can let you find real gems, and the best deals, newest releases, and breaking gaming news all in one easily accessible place. And you can switch between platforms and see the upcoming games in the release calendar. And don't forget that Opera GX is also on mobile, and it can be connected to the desktop version. So if you play games a lot and need a good browser to accompany that, click the link in the description to install Opera GX for free. And thank you Opera GX for sponsoring today's video. Starting off, the tips describe a specific feature of Donkey Kong's Up Special, where it cannot be pushed by an outside force. This of course means things like Mario's Flood, or any other source of wind. And this is true for both the grounded version and the aerial version. This is going to be the case for quite a few things in this video, but this seems like such a basic, fundamental aspect of the move, and yet I never really knew about it. And we can see the extent of which this works by using wind in Stage Builder. Donkey Kong really does ignore it with Up Special. This immunity works especially well on the grounded version, to where if you use the move again immediately after, you can stay immune to the push. It's really interesting. Next, Fox's tip mentions that his up air is a combination of a kick and a tail slap. I don't know how alone I am in this, but when I see Fox's up air, I think, yeah, he's kicking twice, one with each leg, right? I've always thought this, but looking into the camera, we can see that the first hit of his up air is indeed his tail. I always knew that the tail was there in the move, but I didn't think it was actually being used to attack. This isn't the first time a move's true nature surprised me, like with Palutena's down air being a kick rather than a staff swing, but this still caught me off guard. Please tell me I'm not alone there. Next, for Pikachu, it mentions that inputting his side special like a smash attack makes it come pre-charged, thus being stronger, and requiring less time to be fully charged. It took me a while to actually figure this one out, and the reason why is because I think most people just naturally input this move like a smash attack. What the game means by that is inputting the tilt and the special input at the same time, which I imagine is how a lot of people just normally input this move. But if you're already inputting tilt and then hit the special, the move will be weaker, and thus take longer to fully charge. So really, it's always a good idea to smash input this move, as there's really no downside. And this seems to be true for Pichu as well, so that's pretty cool. Next, in the tip for Luigi's Final Smash, the game mentions how he can suck up items alongside fighters, which is something we've already learned about on the channel. However, the tip also states that, at the end, you will shoot out just the fighters, implying, that the items don't get shot out. This is actually false. Items will follow up right after the opponent gets spat out. Granted, this isn't completely false, as there's plenty of items that don't get shot out afterwards, but there's also plenty that do, primarily being battering items and such. So it's not like there's something to learn here. I'm just trying to disprove something potentially misleading that I read. Also, I found it kind of funny how Mario's picture can be found in the Luigi's tip section. This isn't a mistake or anything, this happens a few times throughout the roster when a tip involves more than one character. But I still think it's kind of funny. Luigi can't stop being overshadowed by his brother. Next, for Captain Falcon's final smash, he has a tip dedicated to the pose he makes afterwards, and how that ending pose is different between if you use the move on the ground or in the air. Now, personally, I feel like the aerial version isn't really a pose. He just sort of comes back. I'm not sure if I'm doing anything wrong here, but I still think it's pretty funny that they went out of their way to describe this difference. Next, in Jigglypuff's pound tip, it describes how you can tilt up or down afterwards to actually move her during the move. It's a bit subtle, but if you tilt either vertical direction after inputting pound, Jigglypuff will float in that direction. I'm not sure if this is something that no one uses, or if people do use it but it's so subtle that I don't realize, but I don't think I've ever seen this. I wonder if this actually affects any combos. I don't know. Next, for Ice Climber's final smash, the tips mention how the polar bear is actually stronger than the iceberg. From what I can see, this is both true and false. The polar bear does about 19% when it hits you, while the iceberg itself only does about 10% per hit. But the thing is, when I tried this at 80%, the iceberg kinda evaporated villager, but the polar bear didn't quite do the same. The launches were a bit inconsistent, but as much as I tried, I felt like the launch power of the iceberg was better than the polar bear, or at the very least, on par. Which goes contrary to the tip saying that the polar bear's launch power is better. Perhaps this is a remnant of when the polar bear used to be better, or the iceberg was weaker. Or maybe I'm not doing something right here. I don't know. But at least in terms of percentage, the polar bear is stronger. And I didn't even know that it was a separate hitbox. Also, the condor at the top does some damage too. Only like 4%, but still. Oh, and speaking of the condor, a tip mentions how the ice climbers, and only the ice climbers, are able to hang from it, which gives them a good vantage point. It automatically moves the iceberg left and right. I'm pretty sure I've gone over this on the channel before, but I figured to mention it while it's here. Next, Falco has a tip saying that his blasters fire faster in the air. This was something that made sense to me and almost felt like something I already knew, but when I tried testing it, I couldn't tell the difference. So I went frame by frame to see for sure. On the ground it takes 8 frames for the move to start, and in the air it takes 7 frames, so already it makes sense, but of course this only affects how you start the move. So following, on the ground it takes 27 frames for the next laser shot to appear after starting the first one. While in the air it only takes 25 frames for the next shot to appear. So it's 1 frame faster at the start, and 2 frames faster after every shot. Not a lot, but it definitely seems to be there, so that's cool. Next, Marth's neutral special has a tip describing how you can now tilt the move, which is something that I knew. However, the tip also describes how hitting an opponent's head does a bit more damage. At first, I thought this was just a hint that angling upwards deals more damage, which we can see here is the case. This wouldn't be the first time angling a move upwards makes it stronger. But then I tested around and it seems that's not the case. This really is dependent on whether or not you hit someone's head, as angling it upwards here doesn't do extra damage because it didn't hit Marth's head. But if he crouches and you don't angle it at all, it does hit his head, dealing extra damage. I think the idea of a headshot mechanic is really cool. Maybe they mentioned this in one of the older trailers, but I totally forgot about it if that's the case. Especially because this hardly ever actually comes into play. But this all got me thinking, what about characters like Kirby? You know, who don't actually have a head? Or rather, they are a head? Well, basically, I tried it a bunch of times at a bunch of different angles and the damage never changed. So I guess he doesn't have a head hurt box. Or if he does, I have no idea where it'd be. Frankly, I think their entire body should be a head hurt box, but I guess Kirby can take everything he can get, huh? Next, Roy's counter mentions that it's weaker in the air compared to the ground. In terms of damage, the difference isn't huge, but it's certainly noticeable, but I found the difference to be even higher in terms of knockback. Out of all the counter tips I saw, this was the only one where the positioning affected the move's strength. Normally the only thing that determines a counter's power is just how strong the move that it countered was, so the fact that that isn't the case here is pretty cool. Also, it's worth noting that this is true for Chrome as well, even though his tips don't mention it. Next, in Olimar's tips, it mentions how the lead Pikmin, or rather the one next up in line, has an arrow above its head. To be honest, it's not a super noticeable trait compared to just seeing which Pikmin is closest to Olimar, especially when things are chaotic. But I also don't really know what I'm talking about since I have like 0 experience with this character. Didn't know there's an indicator like this, that's cool. What's even more neat is the tip that describes the flowers on the Pikmin heads. After about 20 seconds of being plucked, the flowers will begin to bloom, and after another 20 or so seconds the flowers will be fully grown. Now the game says that this affects the Pikmin's speed. I've had mixed results in this test. If there's a difference in speed, it isn't really huge, but I can kind of see this being the case. It's pretty interesting, I didn't even realize their heads bloomed at all. Next, a tip for Robin's final smash mentions how using the move will restore all of his tomes and his Levin sword. Normally there's quite the wait for all this to recharge. And yet you see here that I exhausted every single one of his resources right before using the final smash, and then they were all back. You can even see my Elwyn tome recharge during the final smash, which is a pretty cool tip. Also with Robin, there's a tip regarding his neutral air saying that hitting A and B at the same time will allow you to use the move with Levin's sword. This comes from the mechanic where if you're currently wielding the bronze sword, any aerials and whatnot that you use will also use the bronze sword, even if the Levin sword is available. However, for most aerials, you can just input them like you would a smash attack, that is hitting the direction at the same time as the attack button, which makes Robin automatically use the Levin sword. However, for a neutral air, there isn't exactly a way to smash input it. That's what the tip is getting at, as if you hit the A and B button at the same time, it inputs a smash attack, which does the same thing. But since the tip doesn't really specify that this is why this all happens, if users have a control scheme with A plus B smash attacks off, then this technique no longer works. It's not a huge game changer really, but it's good to know. Next, Bayonetta has a tip about her witch time that mentions the clock animation, and how it tells how much time is left of the move. Now I am fully prepared to be made fun of for this, but I did not know that this clock effect actually had utility. But yeah, it perfectly portrays how much time is left of the counter. And as an extent, the final smash too. I always just thought it was an aesthetic. My monkey brain never really put together that it perfectly portrayed the remaining time of the move. So yeah, crazy. Next, Sephiroth's tip about his final smash mentions that characters caught in it off stage will not be given certain effects. Those include asleep, dizzy, and reverse controls. Probably because these would all just result in an instant KO if they happened off stage. Reverse controls less so, but you know. What this ends up meaning is that most offstage opponents just get hit with normal knockback, as there aren't a lot of other effects. Lastly, in Mii Brawler's tips, it mentions how Onslaught will be stronger the more damage the Mii has, specifically the last hit. Now the damage dealt doesn't change any at all, but the knockback certainly does, as when you're at 0%, the move starts KOing Mario at 89%. But when you have 999% on you, Mario starts dying at 67%, a difference of over 30%. This effect seems to peak at 148% of self-damage, though the test isn't extremely precise, so it likely caps out at about 150%. I didn't know the move had this feature, though granted there's a lot I don't know about the Miis, so make of that what you will. And I think that'll wrap up things for today. Going through the tips was a pretty interesting experience. There were a couple of other little things that I learned. None super interesting, but just nice tidbits. I feel like as far as in-game tips goes, this game's alright. A bit more repetition than I think necessary, and some aren't as descriptive as they should be, but overall it was pretty cool. So let me know down in the comments if you learned anything from this video, or what in-game tips you know about that weren't in this video that you think are still interesting. And obviously this video didn't include any of the non-fighter tips, so if this gets good enough reception I might go over the rest of the game's tips. Also, this isn't my first time covering tips. A long time ago I made a video going over some of the named moves that the tips gave us, but back then I didn't actually bother reading most of the tips anyways. Anyhow, I'd like to thank my Patreon Skully, Burbo, Hobo King Niklz, Raighne, Feurolant 700, and everyone else for their support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.